Yeah. Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year's. I want to welcome you to the Mastermind Parenting Journey. My name is Hang. I'm the founder of Connectoyou. And today with us is the author, Molly Porter from the UK. Thank you so much for having time with me. Would you like to say some words about yourself with our audience?
Hello. Yes. Hello, Hang. My name is Molly Potter, and I'm an author of a variety of books, but the most recent books that are doing really well, mostly focus on the topic of emotional literacy. This is my best-selling book, which is aimed, as you can see, probably from the pictures, at a sort of probably 3 to, actually, I've been told by parents, 8-year-olds use it. And it's a very simple idea because basically, the children turn to the contents page, and on the contents page, it gives them a selection of ways that they might be feeling. So if you're feeling happy, angry, bored, and so on. And then when they decide how they feel, it directs them to a double-page spread that gives them suggestions of what they can do when they feel that way. So a very simple book, but it's done really well. And it's helping children really tune into their emotions, which is a key part of emotional literacy.
Yeah, wow. I mean, it sounds very interesting. And nowadays we have to express our emotion in many, many ways. But for me, like sometimes being unfortunate, not so many parents know how to talk about emotion to children or like emotional intelligence. Could you give us some definition of what is that and why that is important in our life?
Well, emotional intelligence boils down to some quite simple ideas. And they sound simple when I say them out loud, but in practice, it's a different matter. So emotional intelligence is basically being able to recognize what you're feeling, which sounds really simple, but many people do not really certainly not as the emotions arise. I mean, to be really good at emotional literacy, the aim is to notice them in the moment so that you can actually make resourceful decisions about what you're going to do in the light of the fact that you're angry or you're sad or you're feeling joy or whatever you're feeling. So it's recognizing what you feel. It's knowing what triggered that feeling. So it's being able to say, I feel angry and I can see I'm angry because of this situation, which again sounds simple, but quite often we don't always make the link. Like the person who has an adult that has an argument with their partner in the morning and then drives the car in a particularly aggressive way to work, hasn't linked necessarily the fact that they're behaving like that because of the row earlier in the morning. We sometimes don't notice these things immediately. Another really key part of emotional literacy is also responding in a resourceful way. So it's about, if you're feeling any particular way, what's the best outcome? What do I need to happen? What would be a good thing to happen rather than something that's going to make the situation worse, which often, obviously, there are lots of emotions that trigger impulsive behaviours that we're not overly in control of if we're not aware of them. But that's emotional literacy in a nutshell.
Yeah, I mean, like it sounds very, very interesting. Is even able to say what am I feeling, because some moment I'm like, I don't know why I'm sad. I'm just sad and I have no idea what happened. And sometimes I feel very angry, but I don't know what I'm angry about and or what other emotion I might have, because for me, even like from angry to frustrated is 2 different emotions.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the other thing. I mean, we'll get onto that later, the things that parents can do to help their children develop greater emotional literacy. But one of the key things is to help your children develop a bigger range of words that they can use to express how they're feeling. So, with young children, you might just start with happy, sad, angry, and scared. But as time goes on and as they get older, I sort of encourage parents to put posters up and add more sophisticated emotions as the child gets older. So going from saying I feel sad to I feel disappointed, it's a different emotion and it's more fine-tuned. And that in itself increases a child's emotional literacy.
Okay, so interesting. Like at first you need to learn about like very basic emotion at first, and then the older they are, the more new words, like the way the using emotion will be add more into your life, into their lives.
Yes. And
Yeah.
also, I mean, if you think about it, you know, there's emotions that imply, there's emotion words that imply you're having a strong emotion, like furious. And then there's lesser, you know, versions of anger, which would be irritated. So teaching your children, you know, that means you're really angry, and that means you're just a little bit irritated or bothered. That can also increase their emotion. It's a good way of exploring the words too.
Yeah, like really dive into like what they are feelings, and I think it's the level of like energy and emotion on each one of them. It would be also important. But yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. But is this possible for every single parent out there? I know that some parents might not even have the word to express their own feelings. So how can we teach children?
Well, that's the thing is, obviously, lots within different families, within different cultures, people are encouraged or dissuaded from expressing their emotions to greater and lesser degrees. But in actual fact, I think there's a lot of fear about the idea that if we express our emotions, it's a kind of like, let it all out and it's going to be chaos. But that's not what emotional literacy is about. It's about recognizing what you're feeling and then coming up with an appropriate way to express it. So with anger, the obvious thing to avoid is aggressive outbursts, because in most cases, that's not appropriate. So people assume that when you say expressing anger means, you know, getting aggressive, but actually it doesn't. It's kind of with anger in particular, and many parents come to me about issues with their children getting angry. It's helping the child work out what they notice they're getting angry. So, you know, they're getting hot, their face is going red, they're clenching their teeth, their fists. Then it's about them putting a gap between recognizing that they're getting angry and actually what they're, you know, preventing the impulsive reaction to perhaps hit someone or say something that's going to make the situation worse. So in that gap, the child can then take time out, you know, so they prevent the impulsive reaction, and then work out what's, you know, what do I actually, what's need, or, you know, what do I need to protect, or what's happened to trigger this anger? What would be the best outcome? And then how can I get that outcome? So it makes the whole process far more conscious, rather than a child just getting angry and going and hitting another child. It's quite sophisticated in its actual, you know, in employing emotional literacy, but it helps people considerably. So, I mean, there's buckets of research about emotional literacy. It makes depression, anxiety less likely. It makes children easier to get along with. It makes them more creative in the moment. So, you know, that kind of not just going straightforwardly to the same reaction every time. They can work out different ways of dealing with things, and generally being better at maintaining well-being and many more things. So emotional literacy massively helps people in lives.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so it also sounds to me like emotions and behavior might be like relevant to each other. You know, for example, you can have the same emotion, but you can have different behavior. Because, you know, sometimes I see like children like act out in the very like unpleasant way, and some parents call like they are misbehavior. So it seemed like about emotional intelligence could really help them to shape their behavior and make them feel like better and, you know, in the ease of really enjoy their life.
Yes, well, I mean, if you take a really simple example, say a child has been insulted by someone they know, a friend or someone, they have got a massive choice of how they're going to behave in response. They've also got to think about, because obviously emotions are linked to our thoughts and our behavior. So they've got, you know, you've got to notice what's going on in their head at the same time, you know, so they're, and then also if they're going to be smart about it, they're not going to just go straight to the impulsive behavior of insulting their friend back. If they have emotional literacy, they will obviously be able to stop that impulse to insult back straight away, take the time out to think, well, what might be going on for my friend? Perhaps having a really bad day, employ a bit of empathy, work out, you know, perhaps he's had a terrible morning. And then instead of going straight to that impulsive behavior, going and actually saying, is there something wrong with you? You know, whoever it is, are you okay? Which is a distinctly different response to, you know, what the impulsive behavior would have been in the first place. And if you take that into all emotions, like getting clever at how to respond to them, because we can't pretend we don't have emotions. Everybody has emotions. So
Yeah.
Yeah, instead of ignoring them, get better at them, get good at dealing with them and managing them.
Yeah, definitely. I think like so basically we cannot stop emotions actually. But I even see that some parents think that they can make their children happy all the time, or they try to, like eliminate all type of emotion. For example, that you are the boy, you cannot cry. That is very weak. You have to be strong.
Yeah.
You have to suppose to do that.
Yes. Well, one of my books is actually called It's Okay to Cry, and it's aimed at boys, because there's a big, in most cultures, there's a big suppression of sadness or showing any kind of vulnerable feelings. So boys and men are taught not to cry, not to show vulnerability, always to look strong, tough, self-reliant, like they can cope. And what happens, of course, then is when they feel vulnerable, instead of being able to say that and deal with that, quite often it just comes out as anger and aggression, because that's acceptable for boys and men to show aggression, whereas the reverse is true for girls and women. It's actually there's social pressure not to show aggression and anger. So what I tend to see in girls and women is that their anger acts in. They're more likely to sort of take it out on themselves, or decide they're rubbish, or in really bad cases self-harm and so on. So both of those expressions of emotion have been suppressed. So vulnerability and crying and sadness for boys and anger for girls, but it doesn't mean they go away. It means they come out in more unhealthy ways. So being aware of these emotions and working out how to manage them more resourcefully is a much better way of doing it. But these things are cultural. We've been told, kind of brainwashed from childhood. Boys don't cry, girls must be contained, they mustn't show their anger. And it is damaging, and it hasn't been questioned, because emotional literacy is only really being thought about in recent decades in terms of the modern era.
Yeah, but I mean, like, it's also very interesting for me because I came from like Asian background. So what you just shared to me, it seemed like it's worldwide. It's not only Asian or not only like European. It's this boy have to be strong no matter where you live and where you come from.
Yes, yeah, very much so. And to be fair, most men and boys cope with that conditioning, but it's not, the idea that men only feel they can express anger and aggression. It's not that helpful, really. And in worst case scenarios, men really do suffer with it. And, sometimes the suicide rate in males, I mean, it's the biggest killer of under 45s in a lot of the Western world. So, yeah, it's bad news not to be able to just express it. And it's a funny idea that we have any kind of fear around the idea of a man or a boy showing vulnerability, because in actual fact, ultimately, that will make them stronger, make them able to deal with situations in far healthier ways. So yeah, suppressed emotions are not healthy.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with you. It's like we have to let it out, and like the thing is how can we control our behavior? It's not how can we control our emotion. It's like two different things. It's like like parents should be aware of. And like what you just share is also like lead me to another question. Like, is there a different way to teach a boy and a girl about emotions because of their gender and the way they think might be different?
Well, I would say just be aware of those conditions, that they will challenge those cultural tendencies to suppress boys' vulnerability and to tell girls they can't be angry, because in actual fact, if you think about it, it's the same way as this idea that emotions can be good and bad. I never use that term. Emotions are enjoyable or unenjoyable. We have all of them. You cannot suppress. It's like you said earlier, some people, I mean, we're taught the world's a shiny place. If you look at adverts, we'd think everyone was happy all the time, and that's the aim. But it's so unrealistic. And in actual fact, that gives all of us a hard time thinking we've got to be like the people in the adverts, when in actual fact, you know, we have the full range of emotions, and that's what being a human is about. But in the same way as calling emotions good and bad, what you're doing there is, which is what happens when you say to boys you can't cry, you're saying it's bad to show sadness. You're taking away pure emotion. So not only does the boy feel sad, he then feels some shame about feeling sad. So it makes it a far more complicated process than just him being allowed to feel sad, say I feel sad, and then working through the sadness. Or a girl who might feel angry and feels some shame because she's shown some aggression or anger, and then it's taken away from simply I feel angry, and then, you know, because healthy emotions arrive and then they leave. But if you add a load more baggage on top of them, saying that they're good and they're bad, or you mustn't feel that, or you should always try and be happy, don't show, you know, we do it all the time. We say, oh, you look miserable, what's going on? You know, there's a sort of a degree of shaming that goes on with negative or unenjoyable emotions that doesn't help.
Yeah. So it sounds like we just label what we see, but we don't know what is behind that, you know, like emotion, or what is the message around it. And I think, like you mentioned about, like, it's make a boy feel shame if they cry. So it's for me, like, if you like suppress emotion, it can even like have some impact on a child's self-esteem. Like they cannot feel confident to express who they are and what they are really feeling.
Yes, very much so. I think with all the, when we suppress emotions, we start to distort and deny what's in front of us. If we're told we can't cry and it's bubbling up inside us, we have to sort of distort and deny what's happening in front of us. And that's, you know, we can start to create a different reality almost from, you know, I mustn't cry, and that becomes the, you know, I will get lots of disapproval if I cry. So I'm going to have to, I don't know, do something else or pretend I'm not sad, or it's not a healthy way of being in the moment, certainly. And, you know, I think it's very important to be able to, in just saying how we feel, quite often that can help with our well-being. To be able to say, I feel frustrated, it's the start of it. Most people feel some degree of relief from just being able to say how they feel. In terms of coping strategies for different emotions, well, that's what lots of my books are about. And there's lots of ideas on my website, on my blog posts, about how to deal with, you know, coping strategies for different emotions. Because there's obviously, if you're sad, your coping strategies are going to be different from if you're angry. If you're angry, it's about, as I said earlier, you know, controlling the impulse, being aware of the impulses and behaving in a way that won't make the situation worse. Whereas if you're feeling sad, it's about not denying the fact that you feel sad. It's not panicking that you feel sad. You know, oh, I must be happy, I must be happy. No, it's absolutely okay to feel sad. And then it's about what you can do to sit with that sadness, to process it, to understand it won't be there forever, you know, and all the things that can reassure a young person, but not panicking about it. So there are different strategies for different emotions, and it's mostly about recognizing the emotion, naming the emotion, and then working out what's the best thing I can do as a result of it, because they're messages, emotions. They're telling us something's not quite right, or, you know, the unenjoyable ones. What can we do about it? And certainly not just go up and hit someone or insult them. I mean, that's quite emotionally illiterate.
Yeah. So when, for example, for me, when let's like usual word, when a strong unenjoyable moment comes to a child, as a parent, what should we do at that moment when we realize that things happen?
Well, when a child's really young, you can't, you've just got to validate the feelings. You can't kind of you've got to build up as the child grows up on becoming aware. So when a young child has a tantrum, you're not likely to stop that child having a tantrum. It's just, you know, because they haven't really worked out where they fit in the world, and they're self-centered and completely and utterly. So you don't panic if your 2-year-old has a tantrum. That's pretty to be expected. It's as your child, although having said that, I would say I would validate the emotion. I can see you're angry. I might be angry too if I couldn't, you know, if I dropped my ice cream or whatever. validate it. But as the child gets older and they are better at identifying their emotions, it's then about moving on to what do we do about each emotion? How can we, you know, how will it affect our behavior? Can we bring that into our awareness? So I often use the example of, say you're in a park and a friend says, come on, let's hire a rowing boat. Let's go out on the lake. And if you're in a happy mood, it's going to influence you. You're going to go, all right, yes, that sounds great. Wonderful idea. But if you were feeling really anxious, first of all, you probably wouldn't want to do it. And if you did go along with it, you'd then be worried that you're going to fall in, and it would massively impact on the experience. And you can't stop the emotions from doing that, but you can bring it into awareness. So I'm not enjoying this experience because I'm feeling anxious. And then work out what to do with that. You know, can we take the boat back in, please? I'm not enjoying this, rather than going along with it. Or I'm really happy, this is great. Our emotions impact on our learning, on our decisions, on our relationships. It impacts on so many things. You can't stop them, but you can bring that impact and what they're doing into awareness so you can manage it better.
Wow, yeah, wow. I think it's, I mean, what is the share, like for me, it's very, very valuable, because sometimes we just, as an adult, sometimes I only see the behavior of a child and I don't really know what happened. For example, in the class, a boy or a girl might not concentrate on the class. Like they either like just sit there, do nothing, or they just get frustrated, and I don't really know what happened. And the parent might blame them, like, why don't you study? You're supposed to study at school. What happened? And it's like yelling, and don't really understand what's behind that.
Well, that's generally because emotions have been ignored up until that point. So it's just like, get on with your lessons. I've worked with children with emotional behavioural difficulties, and you just can't get them to do anything if their emotions are heightened and they're in a massively triggered space. You have to deal with the emotions before you've got any chance of them focusing on any task I was going to give them. And with children with less difficulties, the idea of you know, slowly as a parent, bringing them up to be emotionally literate so they can actually be aware as the emotions arise, or in a learning environment. I always find this, I did a video on learning and emotions, so it's on YouTube if anyone wants to watch it. But the idea of learning and ignoring the emotional impact that emotions have on your learning is a really odd idea, because if we feel a little bit anxious, that can make us pay better attention. If we feel really anxious, nothing's going to go in. If we feel sad, we're unlikely to pay much attention. If we feel a bit of surprise, it will really go in. So emotions have an impact on our learning. So if, as a parent, you want your child to do really well at school, you know, don't just throw them in and say, get on with it. Actually acknowledge the impact that emotions have on learning, and that really can help your child to be more motivated, to not be absolutely devastated when they make a mistake. You know, it's managing, because quite often when we make a mistake, most people really give themselves a hard time. But as we know, you know, the fact is, when we make mistakes, that's when we learn best. We're unlikely to make that mistake again. So it's managing all of the kind of thoughts and emotions around learning that can actually make children learn significantly better when they feel in control of the emotions bubbling up, or very aware of the emotions bubbling up inside them, so that they can manage them consciously. They are going to just exist in a classroom in a much better way.
Yeah, I think that is very, very important. That, you know, for me, even an adult, sometimes I feel worry, you know, like anxious too much. I cannot just focus on my work. I just can't. I want to, that I really want to, and I'm an adult, I'm aware of what I'm doing, but I just cannot, and my mind's, you know, like flow in the air and it's everywhere. Yeah,
exactly. Well, that's the thing, is we involved emotions for a time when we lived quite differently to how we do, you know. So I call it the cave person brain. The cave person brain did not have to sit down at a computer for hours on end. You know, that's not what emotions were evolved for. They were evolved for a time where there were real dangers, quite you know, everyday existence, survival was difficult. They evolved to make the caveman, cave person survive. So you could argue they're a bit redundant now. We don't need them. We're not often in dangerous situations, but that doesn't mean we don't still have them. So the point is, you know, yes, they're redundant. Let's throw them out. Let's get rid of them, but we can't. So we have to live with them. And so better to master them than to just ignore them and pretend they don't exist, which is what our society, our very rational society, tries to do. Say, no, we're not emotional beings. We need to just get on with our work and pretend emotions don't exist. And it doesn't do us any favors in a way, because if we were all emotionally literate, we would be managing them and they wouldn't be the issue that they can sometimes be. So yeah, it's they are a bit redundant, most of them. Well, a lot of them, a lot of the powerful ones, but yeah, we can't pretend they don't exist though.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like, we absolutely cannot pretend that. And for me, that I have been doing some research. So I saw that during the pandemic time, the anxiety level of not only children, but also adults is increased crazy. And we have significant amount of people go to therapists, psychologists, way more than ever, because like now we just stay at home. You know, during the lockdown, we cannot do anything, and children have to do like online class rather than, you know, like at school. So what should we tell children during this time, and how can we overcome this time together?
Yes, no, it's really tricky. It's the same in the UK, although children are generally back at school now, which is much more healthy, because we are social beings, and if we don't have those interactions, we do suffer. But the first thing I used to say early on when the lockdowns happened initially is to not panic children. I mean, the chance of a child dying of COVID is so low that it's putting it in perspective and saying, look, this is happening for the most vulnerable in our society, and, you know, you're fine, you're going to be fine. But that doesn't take and then also put in check parents. You know, if parents are starting to feel really anxious, children pick up on that. So have those discussions. And I would say parents share their, you know, talk about how they're feeling about everything with your children in a, you know, in language appropriate way, but talk about it. But I would say the main thing to do is to help your children deal with anxiety generally. So not necessarily specifically around the pandemic, because obviously the pandemic is triggering a lot of anxiety, but it's really good for children and young people to understand anxiety and learn to manage it as best they can. And again, there's lots on my blog posts and things about this, but in a nutshell, when I work with children on anxiety, I believe in psychoeducation, so teach them what anxiety is. So we evolved anxiety, so we evolved fear for the immediate danger, but we evolved anxiety in case a danger turns up. So it puts us on a sort of a high alert with cortisol as opposed to adrenaline. So we're going, the hormones rushing around our body, and we're like looking for danger because it might turn up any second. And so I talk to children about how that feels physically, and that it is just a body response. I talk about catastrophizing and rumination. They quite like that because they're big words. Catastrophizing is because you're wired up to look for danger because you're anxious, you're going to start seeing it everywhere, even where it doesn't really exist. You might be worrying 90% or 99% of the time, when actually it's only dangerous 1% of the time. So I teach them about this idea of the brain, you know, just looking for danger, and it's almost getting out of hand. So I talk about calming that down. And rumination, of course, is where the same thought goes round and round and tortures you. So you worry and worry and worry and worry, which is also, we tend to do that when we're anxious. And I talk about that and how allow some worry time, and then say to yourself, stop when you catch yourself doing it. Because if you bring it into consciousness, like, oh, I'm doing that thing, children get much better. Oh, I'm ruminating, it's going round and round, right, stop, you know, they get better at managing it. I talk about the sympathetic system, which is the fight or flight, and triggering the parasympathetic systems, which is about you know, resting and digesting. It's the opposite, and you can't have both at the same time. So if you trigger your parasympathetic system by, you know, breathing out longer than breathing in, or massaging your hand, or even stroking a pet, what you're doing there is telling your body there's no danger, you're okay, you're in the rest and digest phase. I encourage mindfulness and meditation. There's whole books on that, so I won't dedicate time to that. I talk to children about what they're worrying about. So it's that idea of, if it's something you can do something about, then let's sit down and work out what we can do about it. But if it's something you really cannot do anything about, you know, if it's a global thing, then there's no point in worrying about it. Let's work out the things we can do something about, and that helps children. It usually puts things in perspective for them. If a child's really anxious about something coming up and how something's going to go, I might go through a visualization thing where I talk about, imagine it goes really well. Imagine it goes really well, and I put that into their head. It's sort of a bit of NLP, really. And then also I say, take a leaf out of the Stoics books, and I say, well, imagine if it was a disaster, an absolute disaster, and everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong. Could you cope with that? And we have a laugh about it, and then they go, well, actually, yeah, you know, what am I scared of? These things happen, and it happens to everyone. And actually, it's good for children to know that, I think I read a percentage somewhere, something like 88% of the things we worry about actually turn out well. Don't quote me on that percentage. I can't remember what the percentage
yeah,
is.
no problem.
But it's good for children to know that, you know, you can worry yourself crazy, worry, but actually chances are it's going to turn out all right. I have a few more things to say on anxiety. Perfectionism and anxiety. So children who are perfectionists are more likely to be anxious. Of course they are, because they give themselves really high standards, and they don't want to do anything wrong. So I talk about perfection doesn't exist. You know, you can't aim for something that doesn't exist. If you want to do something well, do something well. But most things we can do, you know, just good enough. Many tasks, it's okay to do them reasonably well, not be, you know, aim for this perfect that doesn't exist. So it's unpicking that. Another thing, children, I try to say, is don't be scared of it. Don't worry about worrying itself, because sometimes children get ever so caught up that they're going to worry and they're going to get anxious. I talk about the physical symptoms, that they won't actually harm you. They evolve to keep you safe. They won't harm a child or a young person. It's unpleasant to have the adrenaline rushing around or the cortisol rushing around, but it won't actually harm you, because children can get themselves into a state of, I'm worrying about worrying. And then also just building self-esteem, because if we trust ourselves to do well, we're more likely to cope, you know, not have this sort of dread that it's all going to go disastrously wrong, and that links to self-esteem. But that's another whole huge topic, building children's self-esteem.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, like, thank you for sharing that. For me, it's all the information that, you know, like, very valuable, and like, I mean, it's so true when we talk about it. You know, like, we as adults, we only need to aware of the emotion exists, because for me, like, the children is like a mirror. What we do, we're gonna do the same thing. If you don't talk about emotion, how can they talk about it?
Exactly.
And yeah, like, for like a dad perspective, it's very hard to talk to your child like, I feel sad today. I feel like very frustrated at work, and you know, like, many things is not going right. Like, how can a parent, you know, like, overcome that feeling to sharing what is really going on in their life with their child?
Well, it's very much linked to, they don't, obviously we do protect our children. We don't want them to know everything, but actually often our face gives things away anyway.
Yeah.
It's very hard to, they pick up on the emotions. So I'd say it's just about habitual things. So for example, having a poster on your child's bedroom wall with lots of emotions. Actually, I've got some posters I will email people for free.
Yeah.
It's on, again, on my website. and they become more sophisticated as there's 6 posters, and they become more sophisticated. So you can add emotional language, but with children, you can say, so it's not necessarily about saying how you feel always in the moment. It's about building up for your child. If you're engaged with the whole emotional literacy process and they know that you value the idea of being able to express emotion, even if you haven't been brought up to do so and you really struggle to do so, you're validating it for your child. It helps. I mean, it's better if you can as well. But I would say to a child with a poster, say, so today, how did you, how are you feeling now? And today, can you remember feeling any of these particular emotions? And can you remember what triggered that emotion? So we might have a little, 5 minutes before bedtime, little conversation about emotions and the emotional experience of the day. But you read bedtime stories, how's the character feeling? Can you empathize with what that character might be feeling in that particular situation? It's all those things we can do that then actually we will be learning. If we're somebody who's never shared our emotions, we'll be learning alongside our children then. I mean, I didn't come from parents that were good role models in emotional literacy. It's probably why I'm so interested in it. But yeah, so and it's also things like looking, as we said, sorting strong, weak emotions, enjoyable, unenjoyable, coping strategies. Also, quite often with children, if they can't name how they're feeling, I might try by saying, I wonder if you're feeling a little bit disappointed because we were going to do that, but we can't do that now. And in that, saying, I wonder, you're not saying, I know you're feeling this, because you can never know what somebody's feeling. But if we wonder, your child can either agree or disagree, and they realise you're doing that exploration into emotions. So it's a good tool for sort of bringing emotions more into consciousness. I wonder if you're feeling really excited about, and so on.
Yeah.
The wonder word works well.
Yeah, I think that's like very practical sentence, because like we don't want to like label or like assume that we know everything, and that's why it's just close the child. Sometimes they're gonna say you know nothing, especially a teenager. You know nothing about me, and it's not gonna work. But like I wonder, so for me it's more like open communication, for them to have a chance to really tell you what really happened inside of them, rather than like naming like here how you should do, how you should feel.
And validating it. Never tell a child you shouldn't be feeling that way, you have no right to feel that way, which happens sometimes with adults as well. All emotions are just emotions. Don't put value judgment on them. They arrive and they go. And the more clever we are about them, the better we manage them. So I know I'm angry because, rather than just driving like a maniac to work, I know I'm angry because I had a bad morning, or, it's all bringing it more into consciousness instead of suppressing it, so that we can make better choices and better decisions, which, and as you say, the start point is with children, just bringing those emotion words into the house, talking about emotions, talking about when you watch a TV program or a film, oh, I wonder if he's feeling, and so on. It's just make emotions more conscious.
Yeah, I think like we can talk about with every single things, in the house, or when they watch the movie, or even some children have pet. Because like, of course, pet cannot talk, but we can just get what the feeling is. It's kind of the exercise to practice to help like emotion is more present on the child's life. It's not like something very big and nobody could talk about it. Yeah. So I think it's very, very good point. And I mean, especially now when the child have a lot of material stuff, like physical things on their hand, and they don't have to worry about too much thing, because parents always provide food and money and whatever they need, and the parent could afford. So I think some parents might think like it's kind of nonsense when my children have stress or worry. What are they worry about? They have nothing to worry about. And what do you think about it?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question, because material needs many children, you know, they, as you say, are totally provided for. They don't have to worry about food, they have plenty of toys and possessions and so on. But emotional needs, like the need to feel safe, to connect with others, to feel like they're being treated fairly, to feel like they have some control over their lives, that they count, you know, that they're important, that they have purpose and some success in their life, and that they're accepted by others. Now, those emotional needs are quite a different thing to physical needs, and they're far more complicated, and they're more, you know, more tricky. You can't just go to a shop and buy friends. You can't just go to a shop and buy success. You can't go to a shop and, you know, make yourself feel emotionally safe or feel like you've got control over your life, and so on. Those things are far more complicated to get. And emotional literacy obviously helps with those things, because we work out what we're missing, and if, you know, if in fact, if we're feeling some sort of emotion, some emotional need is not being met. So it's a message to us that we need to think about. You know, maybe I'm a bit upset about that friendship, or I need to work on it, or I need to sort it out. So emotional literacy really helps with those things. But I think the increase in, which is certainly the same in the UK, in anxiety, depression and stress, I think there are quite distinct reasons for them. And here are my hypotheses, hypothesi even. The first one is social media has definitely had an impact. So aside from the obvious thing of comparing yourself with your friends' lives, and your, obviously lots of people put their shiniest life on the internet. They don't show the sad times or the upset times or the miserable times. So there's, aside from the comparison thing, there's also been lots of research by a chap called Dr. Paul Gilbert about dopamine hits. So social media wants us to keep clicking. So that's why it offers us clickbait. It's like, you know, keep click. You like this, so you're going to click. And each time we click, we have a little dopamine hit. And that dopamine hit, dopamine's the reward hormone. Now that sounds like a good thing, doesn't it? Like, oh, great, I clicked on it, I'm getting a reward hormone. But the best way to think of dopamine is if you had learned that you've won the lottery today, you're going to have a huge dopamine hit, but you're not going to be able to sleep that night. It's like it's quite an agitating hormone. So our young people are clicking on the internet, you know, many times a day, getting these dopamine hits, and it's actually quite agitating. Nature didn't intend us to get dopamine hits that often. You know, we get it when we discovered a bush full of berries, or you know, and so on, some sort of pleasure. And I'd also say there's another thing. Have you heard of the term helicopter parents?
I think I heard about it. Like, this is all around and talk and shows up everywhere.
Yeah. So compared with my parents, I was a helicopter parent. You know, I was very involved in my children's lives. You make decisions for them, you help them. And what's the downside of that is that they haven't learned to be self-reliant or problem solve for themselves. Even when, you know, with mobile phones, I didn't have a mobile phone when I was a child, but with mobile phones, if you get yourself into difficulty, you can ring mum up, can't you? And you don't have to sort it out yourself. So what we've done there is we've kind of made children very reliant on the adults in their life. So they don't believe they can sort it out themselves. And of course, that will make them anxious. They'll just get into a situation and think, well, I can't sort it out. I can't, because they don't learn to trust themselves. They don't understand that they can actually sort it out themselves. But I'd also say that the world is that bit more competitive as well. You know, when I was a kid, when I decided I wanted to be a teacher, a bit of determination, and I got there. But nowadays it doesn't feel as certain as that. You know, there is more competitiveness, and it does feel a bit like there's more. Jobs are tougher. You know, some jobs have probably increased by 300% of what they were in the 70s or the 80s and so on. So I think that pressure is also there. So it's one thing to say we've got all our material needs met, but Our emotional needs are another whole different matter. So yeah, I'm not surprised that, you know, what's happening with children and young people and anxiety and depression and stress. I'm not surprised. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
different world.
Yeah, definitely. And when you talk about like dopamine hits, I feel like I tell myself like, no, okay, I have to stop using social media a little bit. I have to give myself a break. Like, really don't have the, because for me, social media sometimes give you like excitement because new videos just pop up and pop up, pop up, and now today like TikTok, very very famous. And then you also mentioned like we don't know how many real things they put up there. Everything go through a filter, and children look at that and like compare. No, I don't have the clothes that they have. I don't have that fancy house. I don't have that expensive car. And it's really, for me, it's not like healthy for like the mental health of a child.
Yeah. Well, there's also the other aspect of social media that I didn't say is, you're as you scroll down, you're seeing to go from a fluffy kitten to a disaster in another part of the world to some other sort of social issue. And, I don't think our cave person brain is designed to have that kind of emotional journey within seconds on a phone. Oh, nice, horrible. It's very fast and furious, and it's about as far from how nature would have intended us to experience emotion. So so quickly and so fast and furious in our face. No.
Yeah.
I don't think that helps.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, I before I forget the question, so because so we talk about, okay, we have to talk to our children about emotions, and like we can use many different sentences and like exercise for them. And which age should we start doing that?
Well, I think it's from the moment a child can speak, bring in the language. Like I say, with young children, certainly happy and sad is the first place to start, and then become more sophisticated with it, and then scared and angry, and I think, I did once map out a sort of a emotion curriculum of the expectations at different ages, but obviously a child that's brought up in an emotionally literate household is going to be far more advanced, with a child the same age that has been brought up in a household where emotions just aren't acknowledged. So it's almost not age dependent. It's to do with, as a parent, I'd start with as soon as your child can speak, really bring those words in, talk about emotions. When you, as I say, and again, read stories, talk about, oh, look, he looks happy, or she looks disappointed, and so on. Bring it in from quite a young age. And I guess as they get older, one of the things to bring in then is more empathy, imagining what it must be like for other children, because when we can empathize with other people, we're far more likely to treat other people with compassion. If we always just put ourselves, certainly young children do, always put ourselves centered to our own world and never imagine the impact that our behavior might have had on another person, and we only see it from our point of view, we're not necessarily going to behave in a way that's going to make everybody feel better again. We're going to always kind of put ourselves first. But empathy is another good one for older children to really develop and talk about. So, I would talk to my children about situations that happened at school with friends and things, and I would say, okay, so I'd hear my child's side of the story, and then I might say, well, what do you think was going on for the other child? And you can start to unpick things, starting with emotions, and then you can move on to thoughts and behaviors and things. But just when you bring it to what is going on for everyone emotionally and bring that into consciousness, then it can massively help your children not always see it just from their own point of view. It's kind of, I kind of see competitiveness and compassion in competition with each other. I know which of the world, if the world could be one of them, I know which one I would choose. Unfortunately, competitiveness is all the rage these days, isn't it?
Yeah. Like, I mean, it's happened everywhere in the house. Like when you have not only child, like you have multiple kids on your house, they always compete with each other. Even who take the remote control to select the channel that they like. This could be literally like everywhere. But yeah, well, I think it's time really flight, and you know, like even though I love to talk to you way more because what you just shared like so valuable, and it's like, no, it's blew my mind away with what you just shared, and I mean, I really enjoy the conversation you have with us. So, like before we kind of closing it, do you have any last piece of advice for parents and educator who want to work with children on the emotional level?
Um, well, I think I've said a lot, so I can't, and I couldn't possibly remember everything I said. I would just say sometimes people are not convinced about emotional literacy. And I would say, I hope, you know, the conversation we've just had does help people understand
Hmm.
how much it impacts on a person's life, including adults. It's not just
Hmm.
for children. But obviously, children's the best place to start with
Yeah.
any idea of teaching emotion, because it can be taught and we can get better at it. And it is about, you know, the first port of call is, what am I for? Check in with yourself. What am I feeling? When you have an impulsive reaction, what's the underlying emotion, and bring it into consciousness, and your life becomes a lot easier. I promise you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. And if anybody wants to get in touch, I do come and do talks and all sorts of things around emotional literacy and assemblies in schools, and you know, I love it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. And for everybody who wants to go deeper with Molly after this, like here's a link you can see on the screen where you can find her. So you can find her books, you can find her work, you can contact her directly if you want to talk to Molly. Yeah. Thank you so much. And I wish you a very happy new year, and you're gonna have like very wonderful year 2022, and you can talk to as many children and parents as possible.
Thank you so much, Hang. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you. Goodbye.
Yeah, thank you.